Hi everyone, welcome to Privacy Now. I'm Mike Fibus. Ever since the Cambridge Analytica scandal cropped up last year, our collective mindset seemed to go from what I call a mild anxiety to outright horror and terror and anger. But it's time to start moving forward. And here to help us take stock at just what our exposure is and how we might start to protect ourselves in the future, we're very fortunate to have with us today Professor Michał Kaczynski. Professor Kaczynski is assistant professor at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He's a computational psychologist that actually has been studying what AI can glean from our digital footprint. Michał, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Yeah, so I think the two things that struck me most about the Cambridge Analytica scandal was one, that as somebody who had judiciously avoided the clickbait of games, it didn't matter. They were still able to, if any of my friends played those games, they were able to still discern what I was doing. And two, just how much I exposed with likes. It seemed to be like a, hey, how you doing? And, a little standoffish, and to find out just how much we reveal about our psychological profile was jarring. So you've been studying that. Just how much do we reveal with our likes?
Well, it turns out that just by looking at someone's Facebook likes, you can reveal their political views, religiosity, personality, intelligence, and even whether the parents were together at 21. So a very broad range of traits. And in fact, in our studies, whenever we took a real life outcome or a character trait or demographic trait, we could predict it extremely accurately from people's Facebook likes. And now another issue is that Facebook likes are just one of many types of digital footprints that we are leaving behind. The history of your geographical location, the history of your websites that you have visited, your search queries, all of those types of digital footprints are even more revealing than your Facebook likes.
Yeah, and I mean that also strikes you that it's really the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Oh, very much. And I think that one other way in which you can use the metaphor of the iceberg is that the digital footprints that we're leaving online is, again, just the tip of an iceberg. So let's say if you liked a particular artist on Facebook, or you searched for a particular thing, or maybe you visited a website of a politician, there are things that are essentially revealed clearly by those actions. Like, well, you will like a given artist, or you're interested in a particular politician. But what people don't realize is that it's just the tip of an iceberg. That now when you apply machine learning or artificial intelligence models to this data visible on the surface, you can extract much more. You can extract people's personality, intelligence, and traits that we never explicitly reveal in the digital environment, but traits that can be read, inferred from the stream of our digital footprints.
Yeah, so one of the studies that you co-authored, was taking photos from a gay dating site and basically feeding that into AI, telling this person is declared gay, this isn't, and the AI was able to tell with fairly good accuracy just by looking at our faces.
Yes, so quite a few years ago, we noticed that governments around the world started heavily investing in computer vision technologies, and specifically computer vision technologies aimed at analysis of the face. We also have noticed that there's a growing population of startups that offer services, including services, computer vision services, including services where they would take pictures of faces and then try to extract information about whether someone is a criminal or not, and so on. And as you can imagine, this creates tremendous privacy risks. So one problem is that governments and companies would not readily share information about how accurate those models are. They, of course, realize how sensitive such predictions would be, and how outraged the general public and policymakers would be if they knew how accurate those models are. So what we decided to do is essentially to take just off-the-shelf computer vision algorithms, algorithms that are probably much less advanced than whatever governments or cutting-edge startups are using, and try to see what these libraries, what these off-the-shelf models can reveal about an individual just by looking at their face. And we were shocked and surprised and scared to notice that one of the traits that can be very easily determined by those off-the-shelf algorithms is sexual orientation. So essentially, we have shown that in a sample of images from a dating website, these algorithms can very clearly distinguish between people who self-reported to be gay and those who self-reported to be straight.
Yeah, that's truly scary. Not so much in this country, hopefully not ever, but I mean, certainly with China, governments that are looking to sift out folks, this could be a very powerful tool. Very scary.
There's no question about it. And I would say, even in America, there are places, unfortunately, still in this country where making sure that the information about your sexual orientation is private can still be, the safest way to go about it. And of course, some people want to keep their intimate traits private, regardless of whether it's safe to reveal them or not. And I think one of the issues that we are facing now with the tremendous progress in AI and machine learning and the rapid increase of the amounts of data, amounts of digital footprints that we are leaving behind when using digital products and services. So one of the issues we're facing is that regardless of whether you believe that people should have rights to privacy or not, and I strongly believe that we should have rights to privacy and we should be able to choose. But regardless of what you believe in, it seems that reality now is such is that a motivated third party is able to infer virtually any intimate traits of ours with very little effort and very little data.
Yeah, it's truly scary, and I think you scared some folks in the intended way, but also in unintended ways as well. I got a kick out of on your website. Your path to this point, it sort of mirrors Cambridge Analytica in some sense, and you actually have a declaration that no, I had nothing to do with that.
Well, Cambridge Analytica, people working for them mentioned a few times that what they were doing, the algorithms they were deploying, were somewhat similar to the algorithms that I've been studying. And that resulted in me receiving a lot of heat. People misinterpreted it. People thought that maybe, I'm behind Cambridge Analytica or help this company in some ways. In fact, my papers were essentially warning against the future in which companies like Cambridge Analytica could reveal people's intimate traits based on their digital footprints. And if Cambridge Analytica leadership and engineers actually read my papers, they hopefully would have better understanding of the risks of the actions that they have taken that ultimately led to the demise of the company. Not to mention, of course, that if they read my papers, they would also see that Facebook likes are one of the lamest digital footprints out there. As you mentioned before, when people click like, they understand that others are going to see it. So there's nothing overly intimate in people's Facebook likes. Now, people's search logs, browsing logs, people's credit card records, people's history of GPS locations, those types of digital footprints are much more revealing about their intimate traits than Facebook likes. Unfortunately, those types of digital footprints can be also legally and cheaply purchased from one of the data aggregators online. So essentially, Cambridge Analytica folks, their focus on Facebook likes was just a proof that they didn't really know very well what they were doing. And people should remember that there's a broad range of other companies, and those companies existed way before Cambridge Analytica, that are doing exactly what Cambridge Analytica has done, just in much more powerful way. And because those companies are also more experienced, they know that one thing that no one wants to know is how you make the sausage. So essentially, they just keeping their heads low and keeping quiet about how they're achieving the goals, how they're targeting the users.
That's a really good point. In a sense, Cambridge Analytica was just one data point out of one online property.
Tip of an iceberg, as you said before.
Yeah. Uh, and, these aggregators are taking multiple data points from Facebook, Twitter, from our credit card, banks, from our maps, searches. And I mean, that is, as you said, that's very powerful. I really liked your post-privacy world, as you described today and going forward. How do we live in a post-privacy world?
Well, so of course, you can think of many ways in which we can essentially slow down the deterioration of our privacy. We can use encryption, we can stop using social media, limit our use of credit cards, and so on. It's just that in the broader scheme of things, those actions are insignificant. We are leaving enough digital footprints behind, even if we try to limit our exposure, for a good algorithm to be able to reveal our intimate traits. And of course, ceasing to use apps such as Facebook or Google Maps is going to make people's lives more difficult, less convenient. And if you're a wealthy, successful person with a bunch of assistants and living close to work, you can probably afford not using Google Maps or online banking. But most of us just can't really afford a life in which we don't use, navigation or online banking or communication platforms. That's just essentially making our lives too easy to expect that people will now just stop using them. And again, it would be absolutely meaningless because even if they did, there's still enough data out there to make very accurate predictions about them. So I think that the path forward is to accept that privacy is gone. Now, I'm not happy about this, and I might be wrong. But even if I'm wrong, the world, if we focus on shaping the world in such a way as to make it a habitable and safe space, despite there being no privacy, it's still going to be a better world to live in, even if I'm gone and actually will find some magical technology, some unknown yet to humanity that will somehow allow us to preserve privacy.
So, are you a fan of, legislation then to help, limit how folks can use our online digital footprint?
Well, of course, I think that we need smart policies that can regulate how companies are collecting and using the data. And there's absolutely no question about this. Yet, what I worry about is that people who focus on those policies, people who in their conversations with me and others say, well, if we just voted for the right politicians and they enacted good policies, somehow our privacy would be given back to us. I think this is just a complete illusion. Even with the best policies, a motivated third party is able already today to invade virtually anyone's privacy. You can regulate Google and Facebook, but try regulating foreign intelligence services or little startups that have nothing to lose. Also, despite regulations, companies and governments will be making mistakes. And we have plenty of examples of even governmental agencies not being able to keep their data secret and private. So I think that the bottom line is that let's not fall prey to an illusion that a good policy will save our privacy. And let's focus on how to make sure that even without privacy, we can still lead peaceful and happy lives. And when you think about this, the problem with losing privacy oftentimes is not just privacy in its own rights. People care about privacy because they're afraid that if their intimate traits would be widely known, this would negatively affect their well-being. And they're right to think so, because there's still so much prejudice and inequality in the world. And let me just say it again, I'm not a proponent of us somehow losing our privacy. I'm as afraid as anyone is, probably more. That's what motivated me to start researching this issue. But the more I know about this, the more I'm convinced that our privacy is gone already, or if it's not yet gone, it will be gone in a very short time. But knowing this, I think that it gives me an extra motivation to focus on trying to shape our thinking, our policies, our societies in such a way as to make sure that you're going to be safe regardless of your religion, sexual orientation, political views, and whatever other intimate traits you may have.
Yeah. Do you see anything on the horizon, legislation-wise, that makes you smile?
Well, the problem, another problem with the legislation is that very often a well-intended, well-meaning legislation can have an adverse effect. And an example here is provided by what happened to Europe. Europe has much better privacy laws than the United States. And yet what happened is that those privacy laws essentially limited the development of internet companies on the old continent. And Google, Facebook, and a broad range of other modern IT companies developed in the United States. Now, those companies are now processing and storing data of European citizens, and they're processing and storing it largely outside of the jurisdiction of the European Union in ways that were envisioned and developed in the different cultural and legal system. Google, Facebook, and similar platforms were illegal in Europe even before GDPR. It's just that no one really could enforce this law because, of course, you cannot imagine a modern society functioning without those tools. Apart, of course, from societies like Chinese society, which was shielded from these tools for quite some time. But what happened there essentially that local companies developed local equivalents of those services, which did not happen in Europe, essentially because our markets, European markets, were open to companies that would operate in different legal systems.
That's a really good point. I don't know that a lot of us think of it in that terms, that more the weaponizing by nation states, Russia, China, I think is more top of mind. But you're right, the Google and Facebook and Twitter, more like a Trojan horse coming from a non-enemy.
Well, I think that this is also a problem of a perspective taking, right? We like to think that it's us Americans versus others. But of course, others would see the world in the exact opposite way, us Chinese versus those Americans. And now we keep forgetting that internet infrastructure is controlled by the United States. Great and successful communication platforms and information platforms such as Google or Gmail or Facebook, all of those companies have been conceived in the United States and are under influence of the local legal and social systems. So, of course, I think we should all understand that that governments and citizens in other countries would potentially feel troubled by storing the data or communicating through platforms that are completely outside of their control, and potentially are under control of countries that might be to some extent hostile. You can see now, for example, a trade war between China and America. Now, China would be in much worse situation if their entire internet infrastructure was also at the whim of Americans to switch off or switch on. So in a way, I think we should be careful when blaming others for trying to develop their equivalents for infrastructure that's United States has built in the Western world. Also, there's another aspect to it, which is that the fact that there are those somewhat independent environments in the digital space, and I'm mostly talking about Chinese internet and American internet, it actually resulted in some degree of healthy competition being present. If there was just Google of a search engine or just Facebook of a social network, we know from the history that monopolies, just are not that innovative and are not that great at creating, efficient and cheap products. Now, thanks to the fact that those environments are separate and Chinese internet is populated with equivalents of Google, Facebook, and now increasingly Chinese engineers, Chinese companies come up with products that are much more advanced and sophisticated than what was built in America. This actually, essentially helps to cross-pollinate those environments. At the beginning, Chinese companies were copying whatever solutions American companies came up with. Now, increasingly, you can see the reverse happening. You can see American companies being inspired by what's happening in Chinese environment. And I think that at the end of the day, it's great for us customers, consumers.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a great quote from somebody. There's never a better motivator than being uncomfortable. Mihao, what can't you believe I didn't ask you?
Well, I think that one of the things that people rarely ask is whether there are some benefits of our privacy going away. And I think that we all keep forgetting that privacy is the opposite of transparency. And once again, I'm not a fan of us losing our privacy. This is why I got interested in privacy research. But I think that a well-informed person would know that us losing our privacy, apart from the risks and challenges that it creates, it also has some advantages, making the world, for example, more transparent. Now, I'm a big fan of you having your privacy and me having my privacy, but I'm not that keen on corrupt politicians and tax defrauding business people or child abusers or people traffickers having their privacy. It's just that it's virtually impossible to distinguish between law-abiding citizens and those not upfront. And now the fact that we have less privacy now may also mean that enforcement of the rules is going to be easier enforcement of the law. And now, of course, this is really scary if you live in a country where laws are not aimed at protecting individual rights or human rights. But it's might be actually to some extent positive if you live in the country where laws are well aligned with the interests of an individual.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, at a lesser scale, we're not talking felon versus not felon. I mean, simpler things like Waze and crowdsourcing real-time traffic information there are many benefits. As you said, there's definitely a yin and a yang of our situation, isn't there?
So there are many scaremongers out there. And, my research also is some of my results are frightening, and I'm frightened by them as well. But I think that I always try to make sure that people understand that I'm not an enemy of Facebook or enemy of Google or enemy of digital technologies in general. 99% of the time, those technologies are making our lives better and easier and cheaper and longer and happier and more connected. So there's just so many benefits out there. And you see voices out there, ban Facebook, regulate Facebook, close Google, give people full control over data. And, some of those calls are well-intended and issued by well-meaning people. But some of them are essentially way too radical. We should not essentially shut down technologies that are causing a lot of good and a bit of harm. We should rather try to manage those risks and try to essentially further reduce the harms while trying to maximize the benefits that we're getting out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if I'd say too radical so much as too scared. I mean, it's sort of a reaction from the heart as opposed to the head about it.
And this also builds on many intuitions that we have, like, stories about fake news or information bubbles or radicalization. Those are all stories that, not only today, by the way, that, over the historical times, people always thought that the world is becoming more radicalized and, more filled with fake information and not as good today as it used to be 10 or 20 or 30. years ago. And of course, looking at a historical time, we can clearly see that it's just essentially an illusion that people suffer from negativity, bias, this thinking typical of many of us that when we're younger, everything was somehow better and more colorful and so on. And this exactly the same thing is happening now. We have a lot of evidence showing that the societies are becoming better informed, more liberal, more progressive, more educated. And yet you hear voices trying to freak us essentially out that just the world is just going down and the end is close.
Yeah, it's a good point. A lot of us, grow older thinking that what we grew up with, that's equilibrium. And of course, it's changed and doesn't feel as good. But there are certainly many benefits to progress. Michal, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and your insight. I hope you all enjoyed it as well.
Mike, thanks a lot for having me. Thank you.
Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.